right, so thanks for having me again. This is going to be, as Jean said, very informal, absolutely not an hour, hour and a half on mold, very condensed. So just a quick refresher for anybody who doesn't know, mold is part of the fungi kingdom. It is, again, very broad term, generally refers to a form of fungi rather than a specific species. So there are multiple different types of fungi that can produce mold growth or mold spores. There are some common ones that I'm sure you've heard about: Aspergillus, Cladosporium, those kinds. And mold is, I cannot stress this enough, mold is everywhere, everywhere, indoors, outdoors, everywhere. And it really does play a crucial role in breaking down dead organic matter. So things like fallen leaves, dead trees. So it really is very important in the ecosystem. And I've mentioned mold spores before. That is how molds reproduce. The spores we're not going to see with our naked eyes. They're too small to be visible to us. But these are the spores themselves. They can be carried again in the air. So that is how the mold reproduction happens. Now, again, I mentioned that molds are found both indoors and outdoors. In the outdoors, again, typically this is again airborne, out everywhere, etc. In the indoors, there's always going to be some small amount of concentrations. These in a healthy indoor environment, typically not high enough to cause any kind of respiratory problems. However, and this is where we have indoor air quality issues. If you have molds that are going to begin reproducing uncontrollably indoors, this is where you're going to start seeing health effects, negative health effects start to take place. And that's where you're going to have, and we're going to talk about the health effects in a sec. So at what point, or rather what kinds of things are going to impact mold growth indoors? So the typical three things that we look for are going to be moisture, darkness, and food source, typically organic materials. Okay, so those are the three things that are really going to help our molds out. And I'm sorry, I apologize. I've got whatever nastiness my niece and nephew brought back from daycare, so give me just 1 second. Sorry about that. So that is what is going to help mold grow. Now, when we talk about organic materials, right? So moisture and darkness, fairly straightforward, right? Moisture are going to be things like your water intrusions, leaks. Sorry for outdoor noise. Leaks, condensation, burst pipes, high humidity. These are the kinds of things that, again, are going to potentially spur mold on. But our organic materials, these are going to be the things that, this is really poor timing, things like fabrics, gypsum board, sheetrock, paper wrap insulation. These are the kinds of things that that could potentially be helpful for mold. Potted plants, if you again, could be something as well. Really any kind of organic matter. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. All right. So those are potential food sources. So that is broadly speaking the things. And then I mentioned we're going to come back to the health effects. So broadly speaking, your typical mold response can look like an allergic reaction, right? So that is a typical typical immune response to any foreign material or substance, right? So could be an acute response, cough, shortness of breath, chill, sneeze, runny nose, etc. Right? So respiratory irritation, eye inflammation, that kind of thing. Or it could be, over chronic, long-term exposure, it could develop into a chronic condition such as asthma. Okay, so that is a potential reaction. There could also be in some rare instances, a delayed allergic reaction, such as hypersensitivity pneumonitis, which is an inflammation of the alveoli, and that could cause permanent lung scarring. That tends to be in the that's on the rare side. Okay, so that is on the health effects. Typically, how we deal with mold is be mindful of water intrusions, right? That's kind of the trigger point usually. If there's water events, right? So such as we had the kind of the spurring moment of this conversation we're having now, right? We had the heavy rains a couple weeks ago, right? I don't know how it was at CUNY's. I was in a non-CUNY facility doing teaching a class, and it started leaking in the classroom I was teaching. So obviously that is something that needed to be addressed pretty immediately, right? So mold growth can take between the typical period is 4 to 8 hours, right? So the material needs to be the incubation time. So within 48 hours, mold is the growth period. So any material that is that becomes wet during a water intrusion needs to be dried out within 48 hours, or it can be a potential source of for mold growth. So that is something that needs to be addressed pretty quickly. So that is when we have these water events, that is something that needs to be prioritized. So that would be the first point to address. And then you kind of go from there, right? If you have once you address the water issue, then you proceed accordingly. If you find mold growth, then you need to either, it can be cleaned up, or the material, if it cannot be cleaned up, then it needs to be removed and thrown out and replaced. And basically that's it. That part is pretty straightforward. Because once you remove the contaminated material, generally that takes care of your source of mold. Once you get rid of it, that tends to be the end of the source. So that's it. Pretty condensed version. Questions?